Good morning, Nature School. It's Mr. Mike, and today we're going to be talking about food webs. So, we're going to talk about food webs in terms of all of the animals and plants and other organisms that feed off of one another within an ecosystem, or benefit from one another. And then we'll also talk about food chains, because these two terms often get used interchangeably or confused. Now, a food chain is just basically a link, or a group of animals that might feed on one another, like right here, for example. A grasshopper might feed on grass, and then a frog eats the grasshopper, and then a snake eats the frog, and then the snake is eaten by a hawk, maybe. That's just one link. But there are so many other animals and other organisms in our ecosystems that can feed on that snake or feed on that frog. It's not just a hawk. So the food webs kind of show us, as you can see right here, how all of these animals benefit from one another in one way or another. Before we get moving, we're going to talk about where all energy starts. So all energy on Earth starts from right here, from the sun. And you're probably wondering as to how. Well, there's heat from the sun, but they also are able to give energy to plants. Does anybody know how? So we call plants producers. Anybody know why? That's right, because they make their own food. You guys might make your own food in your kitchen, but they make their own food inside of their cells. So what they do is the sunlight comes down and they have these green pigment in their leaves called chlorophyll. And that chlorophyll brings in this light and then allows them to convert that energy into a very simple form of sugar called glucose. Now we all love sugar, and this helps those plants to grow nice and big and strong, helps trees to grow, helps flowers, everything. So we call that process photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is very important for all these other animals to eat. If it wasn't for photosynthesis, we wouldn't be able to eat lettuce or salad or tomatoes or apples, all those things. Very, very important. So the sun is where it all starts. Then we move on to the next step. Can anybody think of what might eat plants? If you're a vegetarian, you know. We call these herbivores. So herbivores, like grasshoppers, some insects, all of these things are very, very important because they're able to consume these plants. So the herbivores then can either be consumed by an omnivore or a carnivore, which we'll talk about here in a second, or they can just continue to eat and live about their day. Now, an omnivore, do we know what an omnivore is? Take a look around the room that you're in. If you're by yourself, if you're with mom or dad, you are an omnivore. We eat plants and we eat meat. Now, some of us are strictly vegetarians, so we might not eat meat, but that's not to say that we're not omnivores. We identify animals as omnivores or herbivores by their teeth. How so? Because you have molars, like these ones here, used for mashing and grinding of plants and meat, and then you have canine teeth and front teeth for ripping and tearing of meat. Now, if you look at herbivores, like a white-tailed deer, for example, most of their teeth are flat, and they're only able to mash and grind things up. Now, carnivores, most of them, have nice, sharp teeth that are used for tearing and ripping. The omnivore can either eat an herbivore or the plants. So now we can see how one another are benefiting. Then we have our carnivore, which are strictly meat eaters. For example, like a polar bear strictly eats meat. Now why? Because other bears are omnivores, like a black bear. They eat plants and meat. Well, it's strictly because of their environment. A polar bear doesn't have access to things like plants and things like that because they're up in the Arctic. So, and then a carnivore can eat either the omnivore or the herbivore. Then at some point, all of these animals, the carnivores, the omnivores, the herbivores, the plants, will all die. And that's when the decomposers take over. So they will eat or start to break down all of these things, these plants and these animals. So these decomposers basically help the cycle to restart itself. They're breaking down dead organic material and basically putting this all together and really kind of meshing this food web together. Let's go over that term food chain again. As you can see here, the grasshopper is consuming the grass, the producer. So they're the primary consumer. So when we're looking at this food chain, that grasshopper eats the grass, then that grasshopper is eaten by a bird. And then maybe that bird can be eaten by a snake or a hawk, for example, a variety of things that can happen. And then once that hawk dies, the decomposer will take over and start to break those things down, like we said. There is your very simple food chain. Now, when we talk about food webs, as you can see in this aquatic habitat photo, these animals that live in the water all are kind of meshed together. So in this aquatic habitat, there are tiny little things under the water that we can't see called zooplankton, and other tiny organisms that might not be able to be seen. There's aquatic vegetation and things like that. So there are ducks and crustaceans and mussels and all kinds of things in our waterways that are consuming a variety of vegetation. Then the things like fish are consuming those small zooplankton, as you can see, and they're eating the tiny crustaceans and in some cases other things. Then you have wading birds like a great blue heron or larger fish or terns or gulls that are eating these smaller fish. Then the ospreys and the bald eagles and the larger birds are then consuming maybe some larger waterfowl birds like swans and geese and ducks, but they're also eating fish and other things that they're kind of encountering throughout that habitat.
School. Okay, Nature School. When we look at food webs from different habitats, we can see a few things. Number one is that not all animals belong in the same habitat. So we can see from this one, it's probably a forested or a meadow type habitat. As you can see, there is grass and there are seeds and nuts and shrubs. And the deer are going to feed on those shrubs because they're herbivores. The squirrels and birds and a few other animals are going to try to feed on the nuts and the seeds and things that are around. Also, the birds and grasshoppers will feed on grass and other seeds things. Then you have other animals in there. And then you have the turkey vulture, as you see all the way on the left of the page here, that's going to feed on all of these things once they die. So they're not technically a decomposer, but they do eat dead organic material. Usually only meat, not other things like a fungus would eat. Or not eat, but consume. So it's interesting to see a variety of different habitats, because we did talk about that one that was more of an aquatic type habitat. We talked about producers and consumers very early on. So your producers are the plants that are making food for themselves. The consumers are the ones consuming the food or the other organisms. So, and then there are kind of like a tier like we built. So you have your primary producers, which are your plants. Then you have your first order consumers, which are ones that are eating the plants. So those are your herbivores. Then you have your intermediate predators, which feed on both of those lower things. And then you have your top predator, which is going to eat pretty much all the other consumers other than themselves.
All right, Nature School, we're here at Eagle Point Metro Park, and I'm way over there behind me. You might be able to see it here. Back there, way behind me over here, is a great blue heron. So that's one of those animals that we saw in that aquatic type habitat, those wading birds that are going to eat small fish, other small invertebrates and different things that they come across. Maybe we'll be able to catch him flying. Can anyone spot the great blue heron hanging out over there in the corner? What I want you guys to do is to tell me what animals, you can comment in the video below, what animals and plants and things you might find in this type of habitat. You can go back in through the video and use some of the pictures and things that we had to try to find some of the things that might be there. Now hopefully you guys can see a little better here because he's sitting right there. We'll zoom in a little bit for you to help you. Let us know if you can spot him. It's pretty tough. So he's kind of right in the center of the screen there. Just sitting and probably waiting for some breakfast or some fish to kind of swim by. All right, Nature School, so we've learned all about food webs and food chains and what the differences are. We've learned about that energy pyramid and how all of these animals that are going to live in these variety of habitats that we have throughout Ohio, throughout Erie County, and throughout the world. Now you guys can share with me some animals and things that might live right here in this type of habitat. All right? All right, Nature School, I'll see you guys in a few weeks. Pound it.